life is not meant to be one continuous party. It just isn't.
Today's guest is Wayne Parcell. Wayne's story is inspiring and deals a lot about facing adversity with resilience and optimism. Growing up in commission housing in a domestic violence setting, Wayne got through that, studied law, became an advisor to the Commonwealth Government in all areas like intelligence, defence and immigration, and now is running for mayor on the Sunshine Coast. It's a wonderful story and I hope you really enjoy it. Here is Wayne Parcell.
When you compromise your values even a little bit, it's a slippery slope. Because I think that everyone has the ability to do that. And I think when you think you don't, that's the most dangerous. When you look at them, and for many years I was like that.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, oh, no, I couldn't do that. I'm too pure. You know, or you see, you know, a corrupt politician, or you see, you know, anyone committing any sort of act or crime or compromising their own values, and people who do carry out, you know, really horrendous crimes, whether that's, you know, in the history of world wars or even up until, you know, just one-off tragic events in our society, you go, oh, that couldn't be me. I wouldn't do that. But the reality is they're all human. The scary bit is it's not like no one wakes up with a good conscience and thinks, I'm going to commit a heinous crime today. It's almost a death by 1,000 cuts to their own moral value. Like you said, you know, the way you don't do that is you don't give an inch at the very beginning. Whereas you would have that experience, or you see that more than others, Wayne, that people are compromised to their own values because they do let a little bit go and a little bit more go.
And that's how I feel about a lot of things, but particularly this campaign for mayor, is that the moment I start letting go of those values, then when I'm in the chair and I think I've got more power than I actually have, then it'll be easier to compromise those values if I've already started.
It's like going on a first date and you're pretending to be someone that you're not. And what is the outcome there? That the person falls in love with the person that you're portraying to be. And then you're stuck in that relationship, or in your instance, you're stuck in this role, trying to uphold a facade that you have portrayed to the public, or in this instance to the partner across the table, that this is who you are. It's not actually who you are. It's not the truth. It's fabrication, and then you're stuck in this terrible place of pretend, where you're not true to yourself just because you're upholding what you've portrayed at the beginning.
This issue of authenticity is incredibly important. It takes me back to a time when I came to a realization that I was not the person I thought I was. Well, I wasn't living the life that I thought I should be living. That was when I was living in Indonesia. And I was married at the time, and my wife and I had been married for about 7 years, I think. And I came to a realization. It's what I call my road to Damascus experience. It's the best way of explaining it to people. Because it felt like I'd been struck by lightning or fallen off a horse, as Paul did, with the shock. And it came about because I went to a wedding by myself. My wife didn't want to go to the wedding. It was a wedding at the embassy, well, for someone from the embassy. And he was getting married to an Indonesian woman. And at the wedding, someone came up to me and spoke to me. And I used to wear a Australian coat of arms on my suit jacket, on the lapel, because I was proud to work for the Commonwealth, and I was proud of the service I was giving to the government, and I felt strongly about my identity as a public servant, if you like, even overseas. This person was having this conversation with me and touched the lapel badge, the button, the pin. And it was almost like there was an electric shock, and in that moment, my life sort of flashed before my eyes with a realization that I'd made a terrible mistake in getting married to my wife, and that in fact I was possibly a gay man. And I was quite stunned by that. So sometime later, I said to my wife, not too much later, I said to her, I can't do this anymore. She said, what do you mean you can't do this anymore? I said, I can't stay married to you because I don't love you anymore. And I said, I'm sorry, but it's a terrible thing to say, but it's just the truth, and I can't explain it to you, because I couldn't really explain it to myself. And that was my first really transformational experience of living an authentic life, or trying to start to live one. And that was a journey of a number of years then that were incredibly difficult at times.
Mm.
But I am who I am now, and I look back to that lesson, if you like, or that experience, and think it was so much better to be authentic and live by your values and live your truth than not to, because it just will chew you from the inside out.
Appreciate you sharing that. In the days, weeks, months, years leading up to that event, did you feel like you weren't being... Was there some sort of angst inside of you during that time?
Yeah, that's a good question. Growing up, I was probably a late developer, I suppose, in terms of interest in sex and that sort of thing. And then I was really in love with this young woman when I was about 17, 18, I think. Then that finished, and then I felt a bit indifferent about everything, and decided that this is probably something that people go through. They feel indifferent, they're not quite sure what's going on. So I thought, well, I'll just not do anything with anyone till I can figure out what's going on. And they went on for a number of years. And then people would approach me in bars and places, and I'd say, I'm sorry, no, I'm not going home with you. And they'd be quite offended, men and women. And I'd say, I'm sorry, I just don't go home with anyone. No, it didn't help really. They were still offended. And
It's not you, it's me, and I'm not going home with anyone.
That's right, I'm not going home with anyone. And I didn't. And that wasn't entirely satisfactory probably, but it meant that I saved some space for myself to try and figure it out. And then I met my wife, fell in love with her, and thought, the realization has finally come. I think I know who I am, and I know what I want. I know what I want to do. And we got married and were happy, had a couple of kids. And then I realized, obviously, my road to Damascus moment, that perhaps it wasn't quite as clear as I thought. And perhaps I'd masked it. I don't know. It's, I guess you have to live with the consequence of the decisions you've made, which I do. And I take responsibility for that. It was my decision. You know, I did what I believe was right at the time. It turned out that I was probably misguided, confused, didn't actually understand the whole picture, because I was probably quite naive, I think.
And then obviously the gut instinct at that event, and that all came to be to a point of making that decision, or it sort of hit you in the face by the sounds of it.
And at the time I thought, maybe it's just that one person. Maybe there's just something about that conversation that had some impact on me. And then it took me a couple of years to work through that, to realize, no, it's not just one person. That's who you are. That's your life. And that wasn't easy to deal with. But these days, it's not the only thing that defines me. So in my maturity, I guess I've come to realize that many things define ourselves, and that's just one of them. I've got a couple of cats. I like cats.
A recent study has shown that the millennial generation aren't shifting their conservative view as they age. That's come down from, I think, 50 years ago. The research says it's 72% of as the generation aged, they became more conservative. But now it's come down to 30% that have shifted. Why do you think the greater population are becoming more accepting and progressive?
It's probably because of visibility of difference. People like me, lots of other people who are different, if you like, in other ways. People who are not part of the usual cohort, if you like. I think there's more visibility of people, and accordingly people become more accepting because it turns out to be someone they know. And we had that experience when I bought the block of land where I live in Montville, that the neighbour told a story against himself one evening at a dinner party. And he said, oh, well, when the boys were moving next door and bought the block of land, he said, I've got to admit, I went home and I said to my wife, well, there goes the neighbourhood. The Puffs are moving in next door. We've got to sell up and go. And he said, but now, he said, we wish they'd never leave. They're the best neighbours we've ever had. So it's not unusual for people to have prejudices and bigotry about things until it's someone they know, and then they meet a person rather than an issue, and it's very different.
Have you experienced your own prejudice against other minorities in your life or other flavours of indifference that you can then become empathetic to that position?
When I was young, I used the word wog once in the house. Actually, was at my grandparents' house. My grandmother was Lebanese. And I don't know why I used the word wog. It was in a sentence somehow. Anyway, she really flew off the handle. And she said, you never use that word in this house. And I didn't understand the offensiveness of it at the time. And she said, we've lived with this for years here. This is in Brisbane. And this is probably the 1960s. She said, we lived this for years. People looking down their noses at us because we're a bit different. And because we cook with olive oil. That was the difference. That was the clang. That was the olive oil. Yeah. We cook with olive oil, and she said, and now everybody uses it. And it was interesting because she was never one to get particularly political, but she was really indignant about it. And then, once again, living in Indonesia, where you're the white guy in a population of then about 180 million people who were predominantly not white people, if we want to be black and white about it. So Indonesians all around you, and you suddenly realise that you are the minority. And culturally you're the minority. Physically you're the minority. In every way. Religion, you're mostly the minority as well, because predominantly they were Muslims, some other religions as well. But that experience of living there for a few years really brought it home to me about not being the majority and not being in control. And that was a very different experience. And that changed how I looked at things very much after that.
What more can be done, do you think, to continue that trend of acceptance and equality of indifference?
Everybody needs to stand up for it. People need to call it out. It doesn't mean particularly aggressive about it, but we need to stand up for it. We need to be visible about it. We shouldn't hide it. Issues like domestic violence, for example, the toxicity of some masculine people, men, their behaviours. We just can't tolerate that sort of thing. It's not an acceptable way to go. It's not acceptable to treat people badly. It's not acceptable to treat people with contempt or disrespect because they're not the same as you. Because after all, we're all humans, and I think this this predisposition to labelling everybody, I think it's become unhelpful. And I think particularly in some of the marginalised communities, they wear those labels with pride. But unfortunately, those labels also then divide us because it sets up immediately a division from others. And true inclusivity and acceptance comes from the absence of the labels. But it's hard for people to give up those labels because they feel some power and also some defence. They see them as a shield for themselves.
It's their identity to have those labels of others.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those ideas of inclusivity and acceptance, they are what underpin the Rainbow Festival.
Yes.
And for the listeners who don't know the Rainbow Festival, tell me about the genesis of it and how it has gone from strength to strength.
It started because I was a bit active in the community, in my local community, doing things to help the tennis club and other things and rebuild that. And people said to me, "Oh, you're someone that gets things done. You know, we'd love to have a Mardi Gras parade in the main street." And I was like completely aghast at the idea. And I said,
This is up in the Sunshine Coast hinterland.
"This isn't a hinterland." I said,
Was there only about 4 people suggesting the Mardi Gras?
It was a few, more than a few. And I just said, no, it's not a good idea. And
It's a very conservative.
very conservative.
Yeah.
And they persisted with this for a couple of years. And eventually I said, okay, all right. I said, we could have a festival perhaps, not a Mardi Gras parade, but perhaps a festival that celebrates some of the values that the Mardi Gras tries to promote and instill with people. Values of diversity, inclusion, sustainability, reconciliation. I said, and if you have a festival, perhaps then we could have a parade of some sort. Perhaps. Because it's not an easy thing to do. The main street is basically the only way in and out of the community, and it's the main road across the range. So I said, that's not going to be an easy thing to do. So then I thought of a name. I thought we live on the range. I was thinking rainbow. It's got that sort of connotation of all-inclusiveness in terms of all of those colours. So the Rainbow Festival came to be. And then the next thing you know, we're into year 3 this year of a festival, 5,000 attendances last year. The first year people were a bit hesitant about it. It was a little too much for them, some of the imagery that we used, which was simply people dressed up in costume. Second year they warmed up a bit more, but so then did the haters, who then started publishing defamatory material all around the place. And we just let it go. We just let the community deal with that. And ultimately it was very successful, and people actually said, oh, it was really good, almost by surprise. And I think they were surprised that it wasn't some backyard festival. It was done really well. We invested an enormous amount of time and effort into it. And last year's festival, we had in excess of 60 volunteers from the community actively interested to help and participate, which was testament to the fact that we reached the community and people wanted to be involved. And it's now reasonably well known, and it's going to grow. And it's a way of bringing those values, particularly of diversity and inclusion, to people in a gentler way, because it tries to have those values creep up on people through those events that are not particularly contentious, but it demonstrates to them that difference can be celebrated, it can be fun, it can be enjoyable, you can learn something, you don't need to be offended, you don't need to even agree that that's the life you want to have, but you can accept the fact that other people may have those lives and have those interests that share the same values of essentially of kindness and respect.
I think also that those underpinning values and how you said that inclusivity trait creeps up on them, I think it's particularly impactful when it's based around community, that you are you're intrinsically exposed to it whilst being part of the community piece. Because we're all human and we want that connective nature. We want to get away from screens and be actually side by side people and be part of a community. And there's risk out there that's getting lost.
Yeah.
But to be in a place for a couple of days where you're actually with everyone else, getting that undertone of inclusivity, I think it's obviously working a treat.
Yeah, it's been a great surprise. Interestingly, Montville had one of the highest rates of approval for the marriage equality survey in the state, just Montville itself. So there was a foundation of willingness there, and so we've built on that. And the community understands now that it's not about individuals, it's actually about the community and about individuals inside a community, and it's about celebrating what those individuals bring to the whole community, and the whole community benefits from that. And the individuals, of course, benefit because they're accepted by the community and valued for who they are, but in the context of a community.
We talked a little bit about politics at the start, and we'll probably continue a little bit later on. And the reason why we do that with you, Wayne, is because of your experience advising the Commonwealth government for so many years. But I wanted to take back further, even more back in those days of calling out WOG, and as a child coming up through public housing and how was that as a kid? What are those experiences? What are those memories for you?
Yeah, growing up in public housing in south side of Brisbane in an environment of domestic violence wasn't a great start. It's not a great start for anybody. And I think one of the things that I gained from that was incredible resilience and determination. And I'm surprisingly optimistic, and have been since I was a child, notwithstanding living in a very challenging environment. And I recently had to put together a letter to myself for an event which I had to speak at and read this letter for about 7 minutes, and it's a letter to your 11, 12-year-old self. And I really struggled with that because it was the first time that I'd ever had to really put down on paper what my life had looked like and describe it to someone, even though I was describing it to myself. And when I got to the end of that, I was incredibly disappointed and surprised that anyone hearing it would think, oh, God, this is just too much. It's too dire. Where's the joy? Where's the light in this? Because the person standing here in front of us now doesn't look like they're dying under the weight of this. And I thought, okay, so I had to go back over it and dig even deeper to find what joy and light there was, because there must have been. Otherwise, I'd probably be sitting in prison or somewhere else now, even if I was alive. And what I realised then was that those experiences, for whatever reason, and I don't know where it comes from, but for whatever reason, I always thought things would get better. I had that, and I still use similar phrases today. Oh, it'll work out all right. It'll be fine, because I had that belief, unshakable belief, that things would always improve, notwithstanding that it didn't improve until I was about 17 when we left for the last time. But I guess it was a long time coming that things would get better. But it didn't stop me. But what I learned in that process was how to be resilient. I learned determination. I looked for escapes. So one of my escapes, for example, was at the age of 16, after saving up, working in Pizza Huts and other things, saved up enough money to travel overseas when I was 16 at the end of year 11. And I travelled overseas for 6 weeks by myself, fully funded, on my own, back in 1975, when there was no such thing as mobile phone.
Wasn't a lonely planet even.
It wasn't even a lonely planet.
Yeah.
And I look back now and realise I was I was escaping. It was an escape hatch that I took, and it gave me some relief for a short period. And when I came back, I felt differently about everything. And my parents, including my father, who was the perpetrator of the devilish life we had, he could see it too, because I had a different sense of myself then, and he was much more guarded with me after that, and didn't really engage much with me then, which wasn't a bad thing. So what I gained from it was that I knew that I had to break that record. Otherwise, that record on that record player was going to keep playing and playing and playing. And so I really made a very firm decision to break that record, and that it wasn't going to be the record that would run through my life.
As a victim?
As a victim. And went to university, did law, and so on. And quite a few people helped me in different ways along the way. And I never forget that help, because those people could see that I came from difficult circumstances. They could see that I was also willing to try hard to get out of it. And so they gave me a hand up, and I gratefully accepted those instances of help and continued to do so in a way that brings me to where I am today, which is it's time for me to do something in return. It won't be for those individuals, but it'll be for other people. And maybe people can see that someone like me who came from somewhere like that can be something you can aspire to. You can actually change the situation you're in. It's not easy. And, there's elements of luck with it as well.
How old were you when you first realised that such an environment with domestic violence was A, not normal, and B, not safe? Do you recall that?
I think I must have been about 5, I'll say.
Fuck.
Because you didn't talk to people about it. And there was a policeman living next door, and no one ever said anything. And so you just knew.
And that policeman would have known?
Oh, yes. He knew.
And did nothing?
The whole neighbourhood knew. And no one did anything, which I guess echoes the comment I made earlier about visibility and standing up, because if you don't stand up and you're not visible, nothing ever changes. And hence it went on for 9 on 17 years.
I have a 5-year-old son, and to think that that's when you realised that this environment is not safe, or not. That's awful. What, as you alluded to, though, you could have gone, 3 or 4 different directions with your life, all by the sounds of it south compared to where you went. But why do you think you at that age, in adolescence, let's say, had such an optimistic view of the world, given that you were in that environment?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Rich. And I when I was writing this letter to myself a few months ago, when I was doing that event, I kept asking myself, how could it be? How could it have been that way? And I just cannot find the reason. The only reason, or the only thing that gives me some sense of what happened, is when I look back to my grandmother's side of the family, who were the Lebanese side. They left Lebanon in the early 1900s, fleeing the perception that the Ottoman Empire was going to overrun the country, and they fled to Australia. And I think there's a sense of optimism in that they thought, we could make a change and things can be better. And I think an element of that must come through to future generations, that there's a sense of optimism that if you open yourself to it, it's there and you can take it. It's that intergenerational impact of what people have done before you. And I'm sure it creeps down through those generations. And that's the only place that I can find it.
That it was innate. It was an innate skill of yours.
Yeah, innate survival.
Not something you learned. It was something that you had within you. Maybe after the trip to overseas when you were 16, there's obviously the need. Not only you said to break the record for your own life as a victim, but I would presume that a lot of victims of domestic violence, particularly from the paternal side, would mirror that behaviour as they get older, and particularly as when they become fathers. Was there moments where you had to go check yourself and then make an active decision to be the circuit breaker, or was it just not within your own DNA that you'd ever be influenced by your father's actions?
Yeah, I think I made a very conscious decision that violence was not an answer. And so at school, when I was bullied, I would never react or respond, because I knew, probably from the experience that I was living in, I knew that would just beget more. So I expect that framed my behaviour. And then as I got to 17 and 18, I made that very conscious decision. I read every book on psycho and self-analysis that you could find to try and understand what goes on in your head as a result of the life you've lived and your parenting, the parenting you've had, and so on. So all those inner child and all that stuff, read loads and loads to try and self-analyse myself out of it. It's probably might have helped, I don't know. I presume it did.
Why law for you?
I think it was because of the policeman next door. Because the law was supposed to save people, and it didn't. And I thought, that's one of the reasons I need to do law, is because people like us needed the law to help us, because there was no one else to help you. And I thought, to help us, you need to be in power. You need to have power, and power sat with the government. And that power could be, you could have access to that power if you understood the law. Yep. And that was my driver, and that was what got me interested in politics. I thought, how can I bring about change? I can bring about change through doing law, being empowered, getting into a place of power and influence where I can help make things change and make things better. So that was the long and the short of that.
Is that why, a 15-year career advising the Commonwealth government of tax, immigration, defence, is that where that comes from as well?
I loved it.
Yeah.
Just loved working in the Commonwealth. It satisfied my passion for doing something for the country. I felt like I was making a contribution, and I worked really hard. I tried really hard. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to be good at my job and do something that was impactful
to the greater community. So in that time, and you're working for EY as well?
At the end of my career, yes.
Yeah, for Ernst & Young.
So I started with EY after my business partner and I sold our boutique immigration law practice to EY, and we sold it into there. And then I was an executive director, I think was the role to begin with. And I wasn't particularly interested in being a partner. I'd never wanted to work in a big global consulting firm. I'd had the opportunity years before. I'd sort of had the chance to probably try. It just didn't interest me. But after working there for a time and being one of the most one of the most senior people in the practice, which wasn't huge then. I think it was about 20 or 30 people. And then I started to think, this isn't satisfactory, because I wasn't seeing things happen the way I thought they should happen, and things were just trundling along in this haphazard fashion. And I thought, someone's got to take charge of this, and it should be me. So I basically made the decision, and I then got made an offer by one of the other big global firms to be a partner. And I told them no, I wasn't interested. And I told the firm, EY, that I'd been made the offer and I turned it down. Probably not the way everyone would have handled that.
Yep.
But to my authentic self, I decided that's how I would handle it. And within 6 months, I was a partner.
Wow.
So my decision was the right one. It's not the course most people would advise you to take. They'd say, make sure you leverage that, blah, 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 blah. That's not how I work. I'm much more interested in being transparent and for merit to carry the day. And it did, I think. And then I became the partner, and then I was a global partner for the immigration practice for the world. So there were 1,100 people, I think, in more than 100 countries or something. And that was part of my remit, was to oversee that and run the Australian practice and the New Zealand practice and build them up to being when I finished, they were the most significant immigration practices in the country. So, and then I spent the last 2 years of my time there planning my exit. So it was reaching the retirement age. And 2 fantastic young women took over from me and are now the partners, and the practice has gone from strength to strength, and I don't miss it. And the team misses me, but not in a way where they're not in a way that means they're not coping. They just miss me as a person,
Sure.
which is perfect, because
That's beautiful.
practice actually just there wasn't a single bump. And that was the ideal exit.
From the commission housing kid experiencing domestic violence to running a team of 1,000 internationally and all of that, do you pay homage to just being true to yourself through that whole being authentic as the key to all of that, or being optimistic? Or
It was the optimism that carried me right through my entire life, I think. The optimism, because I always expected the best, both of myself and those around me. And I would first see the best in people. Now, once again, that's not the normal way, or I shouldn't say normal. It's not the way people usually do things. People are often on the lookout for someone's trying to knife them, trip them, undermine them. And sure, that all goes on. I've had it in my time. But that wasn't my starting point. And somehow the optimism shone through, because notwithstanding my first point is to expect the best and see the best in people, it didn't, I haven't suffered really as a result, not really. And to your point earlier about success, well, I think I've been successful. I don't think I'd call it an unsuccessful career or life. Could it have been more successful? I don't know. I'm not particularly fussed, really.
my mother quotes her grandfather, my great-grandfather, often to say, and this points towards your optimism, where it'll all work out in the end. And if it hasn't, it's not the end yet.
I love that.
But I think there is some value in the idea of following your truth and following your, I guess, first being authentic, knowing who you are and knowing where you stand, which is what we talked about before we started recording, is that things are coming thick and fast in your day-to-day at the moment, where you need to check whether or not that sits in alignment with your values and what you stand for. And I think as difficult as some consequences may be from staying true to yourself, that if you can stay true to yourself, then by and large, or the theory is that the outcome will be the best it possibly can be, versus lying to yourself.
Yeah. I often say to myself that I need to get out of the way of my life. My life has a purpose of its own, and I can help that purpose along, but I've got to be careful not to get in the way of it, because it probably goes to your great-grandfather's point, which is that there's a not that it's kismet, not that things are set out for you, not that your life is completely set out already, but to some extent there is the right time for things. What I'm currently doing now, it might not be the right time for the outcome I think that I should be getting or looking to. Yes, it's the right time to be doing what I'm doing, but the outcome might be quite different, but that will be decided by others. It's not something I can fully control. What I can fully control, I have to be honest and authentic and act with integrity, and then the rest will follow, and there'll be good reasons that I don't know, and perhaps it is that kismet that will take me to the next place.
Yep.
And I'm pretty comfortable with that.
It's the trust in that will unveil itself in the future. I'd be remiss not to mention, you've received the Public Service Medal, Queen's Birthday Honours List. You've received a special award from Australian Tourism for the contribution to tourism in Australia. We've touched on your self-made story from childhood to law to, advising Commonwealth government to the stint in EY, and how, and now, going into local politics. How has your view of success evolved? And where is it now? But where is it, more importantly, how has it evolved over your life?
Yeah, success is an interesting one, because success means you need to compare it to something else that perhaps wasn't successful. And success is measured in so many ways. Success in your personal life, successfully married, successfully working, accumulation of wealth. Which one do we want? And I think what I've come to learn over time is that my success actually comes from what everybody brings around me, which gives me actually quite a satisfied life, generally. In other words, I've got nothing to complain about, really. Nothing at all, because I have my health, I've got my family, I can live day to day, I've got a roof over my head, I've had an interesting career, I think I made some impact in places. That might still happen further in other ways. But my success, I think, it's been my own personal satisfaction of having come from small beginnings to a reasonably well-rounded person today. And I think that's the success that I'm probably happiest about. Imperfect in many ways still, of course, because perfection's impossible. And I guess that's part of our life's purpose, is striving for that perfection, which we may never reach. Or perhaps the moment we reach it is when it's over. Perhaps that's what's going to happen.
Conversely, you're now married to your lovely husband, Brett. You have your 2 children who are adults now and thriving. And I don't know whether it's picked up on the microphones, but certainly you have that optimism aura about you comes off really, really strong. And you definitely feel like you've got 2 feet on the ground and have had, by the sounds of it, for some time. What's your relationship with happiness?
Happiness is a hard one because you could only know happiness if you know grief
100% agree to that.
and sadness. And you can't have happiness all the time. And I think real happiness is actually an acceptance, is actually true happiness, is an acceptance. Because you accept what you have, you accept who you are, you're accepting of what's around you that you can control. And there's a contentment, if you like, in that. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't strive for better. But happiness actually, it's relative to that grief and that sadness. And the greater that grief and sadness that you've had, providing it doesn't consume you, will enable you to move to that place of acceptance. Because then you recognize that it's not always like that. And it can still be like that at times. And that's part of the human condition. It's part of that journey to your purpose, is going through those things and accepting that that's actually part of the deal. That's the deal you got dealt. Life is not meant to be one continuous party. It just isn't. If it is, it's a very hollow, shallow life, I think. Likewise, for people that seem to live in endless grief and struggle, that's only our perspective. There's another purpose happening there that we might not see, and a perspective there that we don't see for that individual as well.
They're great answers. What does the next few years look for Wayne Parcell?
Apparently I might be a grandfather about September or October, so that's
Congratulations. That's amazing.
My son and his wife, my daughter-in-law, told me the other week. So that's exciting.
That is amazing.
I wasn't sure how I felt about it before that, but I'm warming up to the idea. So I think, unfortunately, what it says is that there's less years ahead of me than there are behind me. But by the same token, it means that my life lives on beyond my son and my daughter. And it lives on in another person, or will, in some small way. And I guess that's the best we can hope for, is that some little bit of us, a bit like my grandmother's family coming from Lebanon, the 1900s, and they brought something with them which was some optimism.
And olive oil.
And then maybe my grandchild will pick up that olive oil bottle and that optimism and take that with them. And that might enrich their life and someone else's life, and so it goes on. And hopefully, who knows how long you have, but I'll have an opportunity to interact with that person in a different way to the way you interact with your own children, and you've got a whole new opportunity to influence.
It's an enduring legacy, right?
An enduring legacy. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. That's exciting.
Mm.
And then, I guess on a career front, dependent?
Yeah, I guess it could be a number of things, couldn't it? I might be the mayor or I won't be. And I might be good at it or I might not be. So even if it doesn't happen, I just look around me and think, right, I've got a stack of other things I've got to get done and I'm running out of time because there's a festival to run again that really needs invigorating again and needs to grow to become iconic. The village community needs a push in so many ways. The tennis club can still do with some help. Countless people will beat a path to my door asking me for advice, asking me questions, just looking for something, and I'll happily help them.
Mm.
And so my life will be completely filled with purpose for other people as well as myself.
it sounds like it's always been the ability to help others and impact others from the moment when you decided to do law, to helping the Commonwealth Government and communities involved with that, all the way up to Rangebow and now potentially the Sunshine Coast region. So it's an amazing trait to have.
Yeah, I feel very privileged. Sometimes I feel like that old white privilege, but I try to move a little beyond that and share what I can, so it's not a selfish privilege.
Sure. I get that. Before I let you go, we have the 5 questions that we always ask. So number 1 tip to give to somebody looking to be more successful in their life?
Listen more.
Like that?
That's it. Listen.
Same question, but number 1 tip for someone looking to be happier in their life?
I think you've got to find your optimism. You've got to really embrace optimism.
Look at it glass half full.
That's it. Find the best in everything. Look for it. Don't just find it. You actually have to actively look for it. And yes, there'll be things that will not be optimistic, but that shouldn't divert you.
That's great. Most gifted or recommended book?
A Tale of Two Cities. Now, I know it's an old book. It's a Charles Dickens classic, and I know some people would perhaps be looking for something much more modern and popular. But I read it at school because I had to. But then years later in adulthood, I read it again because I wanted to. And I enjoyed it. In fact, I think I read it twice in adulthood. And I think I recommend it and I like it because it deals with a period of history that was tumultuous. The characters were incredibly large, and there's redemption in the book. There was some selflessness and there was some selfishness as well. But at the end of the day, the love and kindness won the day, and there was self-sacrifice with that redemption. And I think looking back, and your question actually prompted me to think about this. Looking back, I think I must have enjoyed it subconsciously when I'd read it at school, thinking my life's a bit like
this. Is you, yeah.
This is a bit like my life. It's a bit tumultuous, and there'll be some redemption somewhere at the end, and we will get through it. And I think that's probably why I enjoyed the book, because it speaks to so many parts of my life. I think certainly I'm not giving up my life for anything at this stage. That's not my plan. But it feels like there's an honesty and there was a commitment there.
Most influential person in your life, Wayne?
This was a tricky one. And I think it's probably my maternal grandfather, who was English, married to the Lebanese grandmother. Because he used to love to tell stories. His life was built around his stories. And he had an incredible story of his own. An incredibly talented person, grew up in the East End of London, in Hackney Wick, from incredible poverty. Came to Australia in the 1920s, arrived in Australia the day of the Great Depression, the day Wall Street collapsed, and then carried a swag around the country for a number of years. And then eventually married my grandmother in Brisbane after he'd seen her hiding behind a veranda post. And she's a big woman, so his stories were a bit like that. And he was incredibly talented, skilled craftsman and creative. And he also had incredible values. And I think the combination of all those things really endeared him to me, and perhaps and influenced me, I'd have to say.
That might be your role now
Maybe.
as a new grandfather.
Maybe. I can try.
Yeah. And finally, a guest, famous or not, you think we should have on the show?
There's a young woman I know called Eva Marie Cito. Perhaps she'd say she's not so young, but I think she's young. She seems young to me. Incredible passion and enthusiasm for community. She lives on the Sunshine Coast, and she's an incredible woman. And she's worked with various theatre collectives, university, screen organisations. She does an enormous amount of work, and she's incredible. She's just a wonderful human being, and I think she's really interesting.
Thank you. Wayne Parcell, thank you so much for coming. I know your schedule's huge at the moment, and I really appreciate the time, and it's just been an amazing hour to get to know you, your life, and the person that you are. It's beautiful.
Thanks, Richard. I've enjoyed it. I got a bit wet in the eyes there for a couple of minutes, but it's all good.
We all do that sometimes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. Just before we recorded, the fire alarms went off in the building and we had to all walk out for like half an hour. So if you really enjoyed that episode, please let your local fire department know all about it. Until next time, peace.